I don't remember what day it was this week when Zachary called me, and I guess the United States men's national team in soccer won their game against Iran. I don't remember what day that was, but Zachary called me in a panic because they had won, and he was very concerned that the next game would be this morning. And he was very, very concerned, and so I said, don't worry, haven't you heard of something called a DVR? And he said, you mean I can DVR my bar mitzvah? It's an oldie. He never called me and asked me that. It was a complete fib. I apologize, Zachary. But the truth is, we know that the United States men's national team is an underdog. And we know what it means as, at least me, a Mets fan, what it means to root for the underdog. There was an amazing story this week in the New York Times about a woman whose job it is, her name is Eleanor Pucci, whose job it is to dust Michelangelo's David. Okay, this is not a participatory part of the survey. Just so you know, you can laugh, you can boo, but you cannot speak back to me. I'm just kidding. People say whatever they want. And even if I said, it wouldn't stop people. In any case, there was an article in the New York Times, which I now know some of you have read, about Eleanor Pucci's job of dusting Michelangelo's David. Now, you know that Michelangelo's David is 17 feet tall. You also may know that it weighs 6 tons. And you also may know that I never grow tired of speaking about it because I actually had the opportunity to go to Italy and to see this incredible statue. It's an overwhelming experience. The magnificence, the size, the proportions, the rippling muscles. Even I felt small. It's going to be a rough next 10 minutes, I can tell you that. But even anybody would feel small in comparison to David. The problem with the statue, if there is any problem with the statue, is it's completely opposite the message that David at that moment in his life was really all about. The story of David striking down and beating a giant is in fact the story of the underdog becoming the top dog. You know that phrase comes from the 1900s when people used to pit their dogs against each other. And there was an underdog and a top dog. And you know that the story of David and Goliath is a story of an underdog beating out the larger person, the giant. And yet the statue today makes us all feel inferior. In fact, the statue makes us feel like the underdog compared to this colossus in front of us. We, as the Jewish people, I believe, are the underdog of history. Time and time again, we should not have succeeded where we did. We should not have been able to establish a state of Israel in a neighborhood of countries that disliked us. And I think that's why we love the underdog. We like the underdog in movies, and we like it in literature, and it is who we most identify with. And that's why in this morning's Parashat, in this morning's Torah reading, there is one character that I'd like to highlight, and that is Leah. It's not Rachel, the beauty. It's not Jacob, the handsome. It's Leah who is described in this morning's Torah reading, Ve'enei Leah rakot. Leah had weak eyes. And we have no idea what that means from the text of the Torah. We rely on the commentaries that come later to explain exactly what Einayim rakot, weak eyes, mean, but we know it is juxtaposed to Rachel Haita Yefat Toar V'Yefat Mar'eh, that Leah was strikingly beautiful. Einei Leah rakot. Her eyes were weak. Even if we don't know specifically what that means, we know it isn't beautiful. And it certainly isn't as beautiful as Rachel. And I love the way Rashi, a medieval commentary, comes to her aid, to Leah's defense immediately. He says her eyes weren't weak, they were puffy. They were puffy because she had spent so much time crying. And then he goes on to explain further that sometimes our physical appearance is really a manifestation of what's going on internally. He says, "Shaitas v'ra la'alot b'goralo shel Esav u'bacha." She saw herself in the same role as Esau, who would eventually have his birthright taken from him, who would eventually go out into the world seemingly alone, without his father's love, like Jacob was, loved by his mother and father. And so she thought immediately, well, I know my ancestors' stories. I know there was Esau who was the less favored child. I know the story of Ishmael, the less favored son. And it is certainly a precursor to Joseph, who is loved by his parents but shunned by his brothers. And so Leah says, I come from a long line of family in which one child is favored over another, and my lot isn't going to turn out all that well. And she began to cry. She knew her family's history, and she expected it would repeat itself for her. And you know that the emotional turmoil, the trauma that we feel in our lives sometimes manifests itself physically for us. And that's what happened, says Rashi, to Leah. He says that she cried because of the difficulties, the challenges, the emotional drain on her life. You've heard it before when someone might have said to you, you look tired. Or you have aged. Or as my mother says to me, look how gray you've gotten. My mother's watching at home and she can't deny it. Leah thinks to herself, I'm never going to get asked to prom. I'm never going to get that promotion because I'm just not that pretty. And it begins to weigh on her. But that's not what Leah is for me. Because the Or HaChaim, a much later commentary who's actually commenting on Rashi's comment, says something beautiful. Ein ra'ui l'saper ha'katuv gnai ha'tzadeket, ki Leah milvad shelo hayta yefafiyah. This description of Leah is not pretty is completely wrong. She was beautiful, says the Or HaChaim. In fact, she was a tzadeket, a righteous woman. And yes, he says, like everybody else in the world, she had some things that were different than others. We don't all look the same, and we're all not as good looking as others. But that doesn't mean we're not beautiful. The Or HaChaim says, it's nice that Leah was pawned off on Jacob, but there was no need for it because she was an extraordinary beauty as well. The Or HaChaim says so much with so little. First, he comes to teach us that Leah actually was beautiful. not in the way that our distorted society looks at people. He says there is beauty in differences. And he says to us, the Or HaChaim, maybe we ought not judge people by their appearance, but maybe by the nature of their character. And then he lets us know that everybody has something that challenges them. Some are physical and some of them are emotional. Two incredibly important lessons. And that is, first, our society has created standards of beauty that are unreasonable and in many ways unnatural. And secondly, everybody has something beautiful about them. The term underdog, as I mentioned, comes from the 1900s, in which people fought their dogs against each other, one being the underdog, the loser, the other the top dog. And there's no question that the story of David is the story of an underdog becoming the top dog when he becomes king. But this story of Rachel and Leah has to teach us something more. That it can't possibly be about who rises to the top and who stays at the bottom. It can't possibly be about what one person accomplishes while the other one is unable to. The message of this morning is we have to stop comparing ourselves to other people. We have to stop comparing each other to one another. And most certainly, we have to stop pitting one person against another. And then the second really important lesson for us this morning is don't give up on yourself. You have no idea what you're actually capable of. Leah may have thought, I'll never get invited to the prom, but guess what? I have bigger, more important, greater things to accomplish in the future. I'll just give you one example from Leah's life. Leah gives birth to Dinah, the only daughter that Jacob will have. Sorry, Karen. But there is something special about daughters. You know because you are one. Rachel has a lot to give. But so does Leah. And we ought not count her out because somebody said she had weak or soft or puffy eyes. Measure your worth differently. Maybe you're not the underdog. Maybe you do have superpowers. And I imagine that we all do. And if you don't think you do, for a moment this morning, imagine that you do. You have no idea what you yet have to accomplish. There is more in store for you than you could ever imagine. You are children of the Almighty, children of God, and therefore you're never the underdog. You'll always rise to the top. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf. It's introduced by the Chatzi Kaddish, page 184. We're back in our prayer books, smaller red books, page 184. Please rise.